A man can spend 20 years building a reputation and lose it in 20 seconds if the wrong envelope reaches the wrong hands. Adrian Keller stood beneath the golden chandelier lights of the Langford Hotel ballroom, while applause rolled across the room like controlled thunder. Chicago glittered outside the massive glass windows behind him, the winter skyline glowing silver against the dark December sky. Wealthy investors filled every table beneath soft candlelight. Crystal glasses reflected warm gold across polished marble floors. Expensive watches shimmered beside tailored suits and carefully rehearsed smiles. This was Adrian Keller's world. Precise, controlled, untouchable. At 41 years old, Adrian had built Keller Strategic Holdings into one of the most influential consulting firms in the Midwest. Financial magazines called him ruthless but brilliant. Business networks described him as a man who never made public mistakes. Tonight mattered more than most people in the room realized. By midnight, Adrian planned to finalize a confidential partnership worth nearly $300 million. One signature, one announcement, one more victory added to the image he spent years constructing. To success, Adrian said smoothly, lifting his champagne glass toward the investors seated before him. And to partnerships built on trust. More applause followed. Cameras flashed briefly near the stage. Adrian smiled exactly the way powerful men learned to smile after years in public. Confident, relaxed, untouchable. But several feet away from the stage, Evelyn Harper noticed something nobody else did. She stood near table 14, wearing the hotel's black waitress uniform with a silver serving tray balanced carefully against one hand. Her blonde hair was tied neatly behind her neck. Simple pearl earrings caught the warm ballroom light whenever she moved. Quiet blue eyes observed everything around her without seeming intrusive. Most guests never remembered seeing her after conversations ended. Evelyn preferred it that way. She moved quietly through the ballroom, refilling wine glasses and replacing empty plates while investors laughed loudly around her. But near the center table reserved for Keller strategic executives, she noticed a dark blue envelope sitting partially beneath a leather portfolio case. No label, no security seal, just one corner exposed beneath the candlelight. Then she noticed something else. A younger assistant hurried toward the executive table, carrying several wine menus while balancing two phones against his shoulder. Distracted, nervous, the assistant accidentally scooped the blue envelope together with the menus before moving quickly toward another section of the ballroom, where rival investors from Archer Consulting sat waiting near the windows. Evelyn's eyes narrowed immediately. She glanced once toward Adrian standing near the stage, speaking confidently beneath camera lights. He had not noticed. Neither had anyone else. But something about the assistant's expression told Evelyn the envelope mattered. A lot. Across the ballroom, snow began drifting softly beyond the towering windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Jazz music floated quietly through hidden speakers while waiters moved between tables carrying silver trays and expensive bourbon. The assistant approached the Archer Consulting table without realizing what he carried. Evelyn placed her tray carefully onto a nearby service station. Calmly. No panic. No dramatic reaction. Just quiet movement. She stepped smoothly through the crowded ballroom, weaving between guests without drawing attention to herself. One investor laughed loudly beside her. Another reached for champagne. Nobody noticed the waitress moving quickly toward the wrong table, carrying only a folded wine list in her hands. Adrian continued speaking near the stage. True leadership is about protecting trust, he said confidently. Evelyn almost looked back at him, then stopped herself. The assistant had already placed the blue envelope beside the Archer Consulting executives while reaching for empty glasses. One of the rival executives glanced down curiously toward the exposed corner of the document. Evelyn arrived 2 seconds before his hand touched it. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly with perfect professionalism. The reserve wine list was delivered to the wrong table. Without hesitation, she smoothly exchanged the blue envelope for the wine menu in one clean movement, hidden beneath the white tablecloth edge. Natural. Invisible. The rival executive barely looked up. "Thank you." "Of course, sir." Evelyn walked away immediately with the envelope hidden calmly beneath her order book. No rush. No visible concern. Just another waitress crossing the ballroom beneath golden lights. Near the stage, Adrian finally finished his speech while applause echoed warmly around the room again. Investors stood. Cameras flashed. Champagne glasses rose beneath the chandeliers. Adrian stepped down from the platform, surrounded instantly by executives wanting handshakes and photographs. Evelyn quietly slipped behind the executive tables toward the private hallway leading to the staff entrance. She opened the blue envelope briefly beneath the dim hallway light. Confidential merger projections. Internal acquisition numbers. Investor identities. If Archer Consulting had photographed even one page, tomorrow morning's financial headlines would have destroyed Adrian Keller publicly before sunrise. Evelyn slid the documents back carefully into the envelope just as another executive rounded the corner unexpectedly. "Hey." The man frowned at her immediately. "Why are you holding Mr. Keller's files?" Evelyn looked up calmly. These were left near the wrong table. The executive's expression hardened instantly. "Did you open them?" "Only enough to identify ownership." Footsteps echoed nearby as more executives entered the hallway. One of them immediately recognized the envelope and froze. "That is Adrian's confidential packet." Suddenly, every eye in the hallway landed on Evelyn. Waiters passing through the service corridor slowed slightly. The younger assistant who misplaced the envelope looked pale now. "I can explain," he started nervously, but the senior executive cut him off sharply. Why was a waitress touching private investor documents? The tone changed the entire hallway instantly. Cold. Public. Dangerous. Evelyn tightened her fingers slightly around the envelope, but kept her voice calm. It was heading toward the Archer Consulting table. "And you thought it was your responsibility to interfere?" another executive asked. Adrian Keller himself appeared at the far end of the hallway moments later, adjusting the cuff of his tailored charcoal suit, while several investors followed behind him. "What is going on?" Silence spread immediately. The senior executive pointed directly toward Evelyn. "Your waitress was handling confidential merger documents." Adrian's eyes moved toward Evelyn for the first time all evening. Calm waitress. Quiet eyes. Dark uniform beneath cold hallway light. Then his gaze lowered slowly toward the envelope in her hands. And for the first time that night, something inside the perfectly controlled world Adrian Keller built began moving toward disaster without him even realizing it. The hallway outside the ballroom suddenly felt colder than the Chicago winter waiting beyond the glass walls of the Langford Hotel. Snow drifted slowly outside, while golden light from the celebration behind them spilled faintly across the marble floor. Adrian Keller stood motionless at the center of the corridor, his sharp gray eyes fixed on the dark blue envelope in Evelyn Harper's hands. Around them, executives exchanged tense looks while hotel staff quietly disappeared into nearby service doors, sensing trouble before a single voice fully rose. Adrian extended his hand calmly. "Give me the envelope." Evelyn stepped forward immediately and placed the confidential documents carefully into his hands without argument. Her movements remained steady, controlled. That somehow irritated Adrian more than panic would have. Most people became nervous under pressure from powerful men. Evelyn Harper simply looked tired. Adrian opened the envelope quickly beneath the hallway light. His expression hardened almost instantly when he saw the exposed financial projections inside. If those pages had reached Archer Consulting tonight, every acquisition strategy his company spent 8 months protecting would have become public before dawn. One of the senior executives folded his arms sharply. Why exactly was she carrying this through the hotel? The younger assistant who misplaced the envelope swallowed visibly. "Sir, I think I accidentally." "Nobody asked what you think," the executive snapped coldly. Silence followed immediately. Adrian closed the envelope slowly. His mind moved through calculations automatically. Investor trust, media exposure, competitor access, shareholder panic. One careless mistake tonight could cost millions by Monday morning. He looked back toward Evelyn. "Did you read any of this?" His voice stayed controlled but distant. "Professional." Evelyn met his gaze evenly beneath the dim hallway lights. Only enough to recognize it should not be sitting beside Archer Consulting. One executive scoffed quietly. Convenient answer. Adrian noticed the smallest tightening in Evelyn's fingers near the edge of her serving tray. Not fear. Restraint. She was choosing silence deliberately. "You should have handed this directly to hotel security," another executive added sharply. Evelyn nodded once. "Probably." Adrian narrowed his eyes slightly. Most people defended themselves when cornered publicly. Evelyn accepted criticism almost too calmly. "Then why did you not?" he asked. Evelyn glanced briefly toward the ballroom, where investors still laughed beneath chandelier lights, completely unaware how close Adrian's company had come to disaster. Because security would have opened the envelope before asking questions. The hallway fell quiet again. Adrian looked down slowly at the documents in his hands. She was right. Hotel security protocol would have documented the contents immediately. Too many people would have seen confidential numbers. Too many opportunities for information leaks. Yet somehow hearing that answer irritated him further instead of calming him. Because she had been right. Again, the senior executive beside Adrian shook his head impatiently. "This entire situation is inappropriate. Staff should never interfere with executive materials." Evelyn lowered her eyes slightly. "Understood." Adrian studied her carefully. No anger. No attempt to gain sympathy. Nothing in her expression suggested she expected gratitude for what she had done. That unsettled him in ways he could not explain. In his world, everyone wanted leverage eventually. But Evelyn Harper stood there beneath cold hallway lights, acting as though none of this mattered personally to her at all. "What is your name?" Adrian asked suddenly. "Evelyn Harper." "How long have you worked here?" 9 months. Adrian glanced once more at the envelope. "And before that?" A pause. Very brief. "Different jobs." One executive laughed quietly under his breath. "Very informative." Adrian ignored him. Something about Evelyn's composure felt unusual. Not polished like corporate confidence. Different. Quieter. Like someone accustomed to surviving difficult situations without expecting rescue. The younger assistant suddenly stepped forward again, pale with guilt. "Sir, this was my mistake." She actually stopped the envelope before the Archer table opened it. The hallway shifted immediately. Several executives looked toward the assistant sharply. Adrian's expression remained unreadable. "Explain clearly." The assistant swallowed hard. "I grabbed the wrong stack while carrying wine menus." She noticed before anyone else did. Adrian looked back toward Evelyn. "And you followed him through the ballroom?" Evelyn nodded once. "Yes." "Why?" The question came faster this time. Genuine confusion slipping beneath Adrian's controlled tone. Evelyn answered simply. "Because once people see information, they cannot unsee it." The words landed softly but directly. Adrian stared at her for several long seconds while snow continued falling beyond the hallway windows. Somewhere behind them, jazz music drifted quietly from the ballroom. Warm, elegant, completely disconnected from the tension now standing in this corridor. "Still," the senior executive muttered. "She handled confidential documents without authorization." Adrian finally looked away from Evelyn toward his executives. "Enough." The single word silenced everyone immediately. Adrian slipped the envelope carefully back inside his coat pocket. "The documents are secure. That is the only outcome that matters tonight." The senior executive hesitated. "But sir, I said enough." His tone sharpened slightly now, cold enough to stop further arguments. Silence settled once more across the hallway. Evelyn quietly adjusted the black sleeve of her waitress uniform near her wrist. Adrian noticed then how exhausted she looked beneath the hotel lighting. Long shift, tired eyes. Yet somehow she had remained more alert than his entire executive team. "Return to the ballroom," Adrian instructed the others calmly. "We finalized the investor dinner exactly as planned." One by one the executives obeyed immediately, disappearing back toward the celebration while soft music and laughter swallowed them again. Soon only Adrian and Evelyn remained standing near the windows overlooking snowy downtown Chicago. For the first time all evening, the silence between them felt honest instead of tense. Adrian studied her carefully. "You saved me from a very expensive night." Evelyn shook her head gently. "No." Adrian frowned slightly. "No." Her pale blue eyes lifted toward his calmly. "I saved people from making a bigger mistake than they already had." Adrian almost smiled at the answer before stopping himself. Strange woman. Strange calm. "Most people would have expected something in return," he said quietly. Evelyn glanced toward the ballroom doors where investors continued celebrating behind warm golden light. "Most people are used to transactions." Then she picked up her serving tray again with quiet professionalism. "Excuse me, Mr. Keller. Table 12 still needs coffee." And before Adrian Keller could respond, Evelyn Harper walked calmly back into the ballroom, as though saving his reputation had been nothing more than another small task during a long winter shift. By 10:45 that night, the ballroom at the Langford Hotel had fully returned to its polished rhythm. Investors laughed beside candlelit tables, while jazz music floated softly beneath crystal chandeliers. Snow continued falling beyond the massive windows overlooking downtown Chicago, turning the city outside into blurred silver light. To everyone attending the event, Adrian Keller's partnership dinner appeared flawless. Controlled, elegant, successful. Exactly the kind of evening financial magazines would describe as another effortless victory for Keller Strategic Holdings. But Adrian himself no longer felt entirely focused on the room around him. His attention kept drifting back toward the quiet waitress moving between tables carrying coffee trays beneath the warm ballroom lighting. Evelyn Harper never lingered near conversations longer than necessary. She moved carefully through crowded spaces with a kind of calm discipline Adrian found strangely distracting. Most people around power either performed confidence or performed submission. Evelyn performed neither. She simply did her work quietly, almost invisibly, despite having saved his company from public disaster less than an hour earlier. Adrian stood near the investor tables speaking with two executives from New York while adjusting the cuff of his charcoal suit jacket. One of the men laughed lightly. "Your presentation tonight was strong, Adrian." Archer Consulting looked nervous the entire time. Adrian gave the expected smile. "Good. They should be." But even while answering, his eyes briefly shifted toward Evelyn near the far side of the ballroom, where she carefully replaced empty water glasses for an elderly couple seated beside the windows. Small gestures. Precise gestures. She treated every table with the same attention regardless of money or status. Adrian realized suddenly how unusual that was. In his world, people measured worth constantly. Higher titles received warmer smiles. Wealth bought patience. Influence changed tone. Yet Evelyn moved through the ballroom, offering equal kindness to everyone without seeming aware of hierarchy at all. "Adrian." The executive's voice pulled him back. "Sorry," Adrian answered smoothly. "Long week." The men laughed politely before continuing their conversation about expansion markets and investor confidence. Across the ballroom, another hotel employee approached Evelyn near the service station carrying folded linen napkins. Adrian noticed the younger waitress whisper something urgently toward her while glancing nervously in his direction. Evelyn simply nodded calmly and continued arranging coffee cups onto her tray. No visible reaction. That calm again. It unsettled him more every minute. Near midnight, the final investor presentations concluded beneath applause while servers began preparing dessert service. Adrian stepped briefly away from the crowd toward the quieter hallway outside the ballroom to clear his head. Snow drifted thicker now beyond the tall hotel windows. The city lights below looked soft beneath the winter storm. He loosened his tie slightly for the first time all evening and exhaled slowly. "You look disappointed for a man who just closed a $300 million partnership." Adrian turned immediately. Evelyn stood several feet away holding a silver coffee pot against one hand. Her expression remained calm, though faint amusement touched the corners of her eyes. Adrian almost smiled despite himself. "Is it that obvious?" Only to people paying attention. She moved toward a nearby service table and quietly replaced fresh cream pitchers beneath the hallway light. Adrian studied her carefully. "You seem unusually comfortable speaking honestly to strangers." Evelyn glanced toward him briefly. "You are not really a stranger anymore." Something about the sentence landed unexpectedly inside him. Warm, human, dangerous. Adrian leaned lightly against the marble wall near the windows. "Most people at this hotel probably avoid saying anything honest around me." Evelyn poured coffee into a waiting cup without looking up. "Most people are afraid powerful men remember embarrassment longer than kindness." Adrian frowned slightly. "Do you?" Evelyn handed the coffee cup toward him calmly. "No," he accepted it slowly. The warmth spread through his hands immediately. "Why not?" Evelyn looked out toward the snowfall beyond the glass. "Because embarrassed people usually punish themselves enough already." Silence settled gently between them while distant ballroom music drifted softly through the hallway. Adrian took a slow sip of coffee. Strong. Black. Exactly how he preferred it. "How did you know the envelope mattered?" he asked quietly after a moment. Evelyn folded a white napkin carefully between her hands. The assistant carrying it looked terrified before he even realized he lost it. Adrian almost laughed softly. You notice everything, do not you? Only the things people accidentally reveal. Adrian looked toward the ballroom entrance where executives continued shaking hands beneath golden light. And what exactly do you think I accidentally reveal? Evelyn paused for the first time since he met her. Not long. Just enough to suggest she was deciding whether honesty would create problems. Then quietly, that you are exhausted. Adrian stared at her. No investor, no executive, no reporter had ever spoken to him that directly before. That is your professional analysis? He asked dryly. Evelyn smiled faintly. No, her eyes lifted toward his evenly. That is just what lonely people look like after they stop pretending they enjoy the noise. The words settled heavily inside the hallway. Adrian looked away first, suddenly aware of how tired he truly felt beneath the tailored suits, public speeches, and endless negotiations. Strange. One quiet waitress had seen through him faster than people who worked beside him for years. Before he could respond, footsteps approached from the ballroom corridor. The senior executive from earlier appeared holding a tablet in one hand. His eyes immediately narrowed when he saw Adrian standing alone with Evelyn. There you are, the executive said toward Adrian before glancing dismissively toward Evelyn. The investors are asking for final photographs. Adrian straightened automatically, the controlled businessman returning instantly across his expression. I will be there in a minute. The executive hesitated briefly before lowering his voice. You may also want to know hotel management reviewed the security footage from earlier. Adrian's eyes sharpened immediately, and the executive shifted uncomfortably. It confirms the waitress prevented the envelope from reaching Archer Consulting. Silence. Adrian slowly turned toward Evelyn again, but she had already lowered her eyes toward the empty coffee tray in her hands, as though none of it mattered anymore. No pride. No expectation, just quiet acceptance beneath falling snow and fading ballroom music. The ballroom slowly emptied after midnight, while heavy snow continued falling across downtown Chicago. Luxury sedans lined the hotel entrance beneath glowing streetlights as investors stepped into the winter night wrapped in expensive coats and polished conversations. Inside the Langford Hotel, staff quietly cleared crystal glasses and folded white linen tablecloths beneath dimming chandeliers. The celebration was ending, but Adrian Keller remained standing near the tall ballroom windows long after most of his executives had left. The city outside looked quieter now beneath the snowfall. Softer somehow. Adrian loosened his tie slightly, while watching hotel employees move through the room collecting empty plates and extinguishing candles one by one. Across the ballroom, Evelyn Harper carefully stacked coffee cups onto a silver tray, while another waitress whispered something that made her smile faintly for half a second. The expression disappeared almost immediately afterward, but Adrian noticed it anyway. Strange how easily he noticed her now. Daniel Reeves, Adrian's chief operations officer, approached holding a tablet beneath one arm. The investors are thrilled, Daniel said with relief in his voice. Tomorrow's coverage will be strong. Adrian nodded absently. Good. Daniel glanced toward Evelyn near the service station. The hotel manager also confirmed the security footage. Adrian finally looked at him directly. I know. You owe that waitress more than most people in this building realize. Adrian remained silent for a moment. Snow drifted slowly against the windows behind him, while soft jazz continued playing through nearly empty speakers overhead. Most people who save companies expect compensation, Adrian said quietly. Daniel shrugged lightly. Maybe she is smarter than most people. Adrian almost smiled at that. Maybe. Across the ballroom, Evelyn lifted the heavy tray carefully and disappeared through the rear hallway leading toward the kitchen corridor. Adrian watched the empty doorway for several seconds before making a decision he could not fully explain to himself. Handle the remaining investor calls tomorrow, he told Daniel. I am staying a little longer. Daniel raised one eyebrow slightly, but nodded. Try sleeping at some point this week. Adrian ignored the comment and walked toward the quieter service hallway behind the ballroom. The hotel looked entirely different after midnight. Without wealthy guests and camera flashes, the building lost its polished performance. Dim lights reflected across quiet marble floors. Distant kitchen sounds echoed softly through the corridor. Hotel staff spoke more naturally now that nobody important was watching them. Adrian realized suddenly how exhausting it must feel to spend entire shifts pretending invisibility around powerful people. Near the employee break room, he found Evelyn standing beside a small coffee machine, pouring herself the first cup she had probably touched all night. She looked genuinely surprised to see him. "Mr. Keller." Adrian leaned lightly against the doorway. "You finally stopped moving long enough to drink your own coffee." A faint smile touched Evelyn's face again. Smaller this time. More tired. Occupational hazard. Adrian stepped inside the quiet room. The space felt simple compared to the ballroom outside. Fluorescent lights. Metal lockers. A vending machine humming softly against one wall. Ordinary things. Human things. Evelyn wrapped both hands around the warm coffee cup while snow continued tapping gently against the small window near the ceiling. "You should probably be celebrating with your investors," she said softly. Adrian looked at the worn break room table instead of answering immediately. "I spent half my life celebrating deals." His eyes lifted toward hers. Most of them were less important than tonight. Evelyn frowned slightly. "Because of the partnership?" Adrian shook his head slowly. "Because somebody protected my reputation without trying to profit from it afterward." Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly toward the steam rising from her coffee. "People are more than their worst mistakes." Adrian studied her carefully. "You say things like someone much older than you." Evelyn laughed softly beneath her breath. "Life ages people differently." Adrian noticed then how tired her hands looked wrapped around the ceramic cup. Small signs most people ignored. Dry skin from constant cleaning chemicals. A faint burn mark near one finger, probably from kitchen trays. Details invisible to wealthy investors who never looked twice at the staff serving them. "How old are you?" he asked quietly. 30. Adrian nodded slowly. "You seem older." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "That is not usually considered a compliment." "I did not mean physically." Adrian paused briefly before continuing. "You carry yourself like someone who already learned what matters." Evelyn stared down into her coffee for several seconds. "Hospitals teach that quickly." Adrian's expression shifted slightly. "Someone in your family is sick?" She nodded once. "My younger brother." The answer came calmly, but Adrian heard the exhaustion underneath it immediately. "Heart condition," Evelyn added quietly. 3 surgeries before he turned 16. Adrian felt something tighten unexpectedly in his chest. "Is he okay now?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "Most days." The room fell quiet again except for the low hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Adrian suddenly remembered every complaint he had made during the past year. Delayed mergers. Investor pressure. Board meetings. Endless noise about money and reputation. Meanwhile, this woman spent her nights serving wealthy strangers while worrying whether her brother's heart would survive another winter. And somehow she still protected people who treated her like background furniture. "Why did you really help me tonight?" Adrian asked softly. Evelyn looked up at him carefully. "I already answered that." "No." Adrian stepped slightly closer. "You gave me the polite version." Evelyn held his gaze steadily beneath the harsh break room lights. Outside, snow continued falling silently across Chicago while the hotel above them slowly drifted toward sleep. "Fine," she said at last. "Because I know what public humiliation feels like." Adrian said nothing. Evelyn stared quietly into her coffee again before continuing. "When my brother first got sick, we lost almost everything within 2 years. My mother worked double shifts. Debt collectors called constantly. People stopped treating us normally the second money disappeared." Her voice remained calm, controlled, but Adrian could hear the memory inside it. "So when I saw that envelope heading toward the wrong table." She paused softly. "I knew one mistake could follow you for years." Adrian looked at her differently after that. Not as a waitress, not as the quiet woman who saved his company, but as someone who understood survival in ways he never had. Evelyn finally lifted her coffee cup again and smiled faintly toward him. "Besides," she added softly, "you already looked exhausted enough before the scandal." And for the first time in longer than Adrian Keller could remember, he laughed without calculation. The snowstorm continued through the weekend, covering Chicago in quiet white streets and softened city lights. By Monday morning, financial news channels praised Adrian Keller's investor gala as one of the most successful corporate events of the season. Headlines described Keller's strategic holdings as stable, visionary, untouchable. Photos from the ballroom filled business articles online. Adrian appeared polished in every image beneath golden chandeliers, shaking hands beside smiling investors while reporters praised his leadership and precision. Nobody knew how close that reputation had come to collapsing because of one misplaced envelope. Nobody except Adrian. He stood inside his corner office on the 36th floor overlooking downtown Chicago while morning sunlight reflected across snow-covered rooftops outside. The city looked frozen beneath pale winter skies. On the massive television mounted against the wall, another financial analyst discussed Keller Strategic's expanding influence. Adrian muted the broadcast without looking away from the window. Usually success energized him. Usually mornings after major deals felt victorious. Today he only felt restless. Daniel Reeves entered carrying several printed reports and a cup of black coffee. The investor response has been overwhelmingly positive, he said while placing papers across Adrian's desk. The Archer executives are furious they lost the partnership. Adrian gave a faint nod. Good. Daniel studied him carefully. You still look exhausted. Adrian almost smiled at the familiar sentence. Strange how hearing it from Evelyn days earlier changed the way it sounded now. Less like criticism, more like concern. I probably am, Adrian admitted quietly. Daniel leaned lightly against the desk. You have not stopped thinking about that waitress, have you? Adrian finally looked toward him. Her name is Evelyn. Daniel lifted one eyebrow with visible amusement. That answers the question. Adrian ignored the expression and reached for his coffee instead. The warmth spread through his hands slowly. Most people in our world would have sold that information immediately, he said quietly, or leaked it anonymously for leverage. Daniel nodded. Probably. Adrian stared down into the dark reflection inside the coffee cup. She protected a man who publicly questioned her integrity 30 minutes earlier. The office fell quiet for a moment except for distant traffic sounds drifting far below the skyscraper windows. Daniel crossed his arms thoughtfully. Some people help others because they understand suffering better than success. Adrian looked toward the snowy skyline again. The sentence lingered longer than expected. Around noon, Adrian canceled 2 executive lunches and 1 investor interview, without explanation. By 6 that evening, he found himself standing outside the Langford Hotel beneath falling snow with both hands inside the pockets of his dark wool coat. Luxury cars rolled slowly through slushy streets, while warm lights spilled from the hotel entrance across the sidewalk. Adrian stared up at the building for several seconds before stepping inside. The lobby smelled faintly like cedarwood and expensive coffee. Guests crossed polished marble floors dragging designer luggage behind them, while piano music drifted softly from the restaurant lounge near the elevators. Adrian moved toward the dining area automatically. He spotted Evelyn almost immediately. She stood near the back section of the restaurant, arranging silverware beneath soft amber lighting. Without the chaos of the investor gala around her, she looked even quieter somehow. More real. A few loose strands of blonde hair framed her face while she focused carefully on folding linen napkins beside the window. Adrian realized suddenly how peaceful she looked when nobody demanded anything from her. Evelyn noticed him after a moment and froze briefly in surprise. Then her expression softened slightly. Mr. Keller. Adrian approached slowly. You can call me Adrian when we are not saving multinational corporations. A faint laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Soft. Genuine. That still sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. Adrian smiled slightly for the first time all day. Fair enough. Evelyn set the folded napkin carefully onto the table. What are you doing here? Adrian glanced toward the snowy street outside the restaurant windows. I am not entirely sure. Her blue eyes studied him calmly. That is probably the most honest thing a CEO has ever said inside this hotel. Adrian almost laughed again. Strange. Conversation felt easier around her than around people he had known for years. Are you working all night? He asked. Evelyn nodded. Until midnight. Adrian looked around the quieter restaurant lounge. A few couples sat near the fireplace, sipping wine, while snow drifted softly outside the windows. The atmosphere felt warm. Human. Completely different from the sharp, polished tension of boardrooms and investor dinners. Have you eaten yet? Evelyn blinked once in surprise. Excuse me. Dinner, Adrian clarified awkwardly. Or coffee. During your break. Evelyn stared at him for several long seconds like she was deciding whether this was a joke. Are you asking me out because I saved your reputation? Adrian met her gaze evenly. No, he paused briefly. I am asking because I have not stopped thinking about our conversation in the break room. Something shifted softly in Evelyn's expression then. Not flirtation. Recognition. She understood he meant it honestly. My break starts in 20 minutes, she said quietly. Adrian nodded once. I can wait. Evelyn looked down briefly at the silverware in her hands before speaking again. You know, most men with your kind of money are not used to waiting. Adrian glanced toward the snow-covered streets outside. Most men with my kind of money are usually trying to buy certainty. Her eyes lifted toward him again. And what are you trying to buy? Adrian thought about answering quickly, charmingly, smoothly. Instead, he told the truth. Peace, probably. Silence settled gently between them while warm restaurant light reflected across the windows beside falling snow. Evelyn studied him carefully for another moment before quietly returning to fold the remaining napkins. That is harder to afford than people think, she said softly. Adrian remained standing there watching her beneath the golden light, realizing for the first time in years that maybe the most valuable thing in his life had arrived, wearing a waitress uniform and asking for absolutely nothing in return. The first snow of January arrived heavier than anyone expected. Chicago disappeared beneath white streets, frozen rooftops, and soft gray skies that made the city feel quieter than usual. Inside the Langford Hotel restaurant, warm amber light reflected against polished wood walls, while jazz music drifted softly between tables filled with travelers escaping the cold. Near the fireplace, Adrian Keller sat alone with untouched coffee cooling slowly in front of him. He checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes before immediately regretting it. Waiting was not something he handled gracefully, especially not for people. Yet over the past month, Thursday evenings inside this restaurant had become the only part of his week that felt real anymore. Across the dining room, Evelyn Harper finally emerged from the hallway carrying a folded apron beneath one arm and a thick winter coat draped over the other. Her blonde hair rested loosely against her shoulders tonight, instead of tied back neatly for work. The exhaustion remained in her eyes, but so did something softer now whenever she looked at him. Familiarity. You stayed, she said quietly as she approached the table. Adrian looked toward the snowstorm outside the windows. The roads are terrible anyway. Evelyn smiled faintly. That sounded almost casual. Do not get used to it. She laughed softly beneath her breath while slipping into the chair across from him. The waitress from earlier brought fresh coffee immediately before disappearing again without interruption. Around them, the restaurant hummed gently with low conversations and clinking glasses while snow drifted thickly beyond the windows. Adrian noticed Evelyn rubbing warmth back into her hands after the long shift. Busy night, he asked. She nodded. Winter storms make people either generous or angry. There is usually no middle ground. Adrian stirred his coffee absently. And tonight? Evelyn glanced around the dining room thoughtfully. Mostly lonely. The answer settled quietly between them. Adrian looked toward a middle-aged man eating silently near the window while scrolling through emails on his phone. Another couple sat together without speaking beneath the glow of the fireplace. Even surrounded by people, the room somehow carried loneliness inside it. You notice things most people ignore, Adrian said. Evelyn wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. That happens when you spend years being overlooked yourself. Adrian looked at her carefully. I do not think you have ever been ordinary. Evelyn smiled sadly at the steam rising from her coffee. Most people do not see waitresses long enough to decide that. Silence followed gently while snow tapped softly against the windows. Adrian realized he no longer felt the need to fill every quiet moment around her. That alone felt strange. In boardrooms, silence meant weakness or uncertainty. With Evelyn, silence felt peaceful. How is your brother? Adrian asked after a while. Evelyn's expression softened immediately. Better this week. Good. She nodded slowly. He started community college classes again. Adrian noticed genuine pride appear in her eyes when she spoke about him. What does he study? Architecture. A faint laugh escaped her. He sketches buildings on napkins constantly. Adrian smiled slightly. That sounds expensive. Everything worth loving usually is. The sentence lingered longer than expected. Adrian lowered his eyes briefly toward the dark reflection inside his coffee. Across the restaurant, snow continued piling against parked cars outside, while warm light flickered softly from the fireplace nearby. You know, Evelyn said carefully after a moment. Most wealthy men are not comfortable talking about ordinary things. Adrian looked back up. What qualifies as ordinary? Family, fear, regret. Adrian almost smiled at the honesty in her voice. You think I avoid those conversations? Evelyn held his gaze calmly. I think powerful people spend so much time performing certainty that eventually they forget how to speak honestly. The words should have irritated him. Instead, they felt painfully accurate. Adrian leaned back slowly in his chair. Do you always analyze people this much? Evelyn shrugged lightly. Only the ones pretending they are fine. Adrian laughed quietly beneath his breath. Genuine this time. No performance. No strategy. The sound surprised even him. Evelyn noticed immediately. There. Adrian frowned slightly. What? That? She smiled faintly. You look less tired when you stop trying to impress everyone. Adrian stared at her for a second longer than necessary. Something shifted quietly inside him then. Not attraction exactly. Something deeper. Relief. Evelyn treated him like a human being instead of a headline or bank account. He had almost forgotten what that felt like. A sudden vibration interrupted the moment. Adrian's phone lit up against the table. Daniel Reeves. Adrian ignored it immediately. Evelyn noticed. Important. Probably. You should answer. Adrian looked back toward the snowfall outside. I spend my entire life answering people. Her eyes softened slightly at the exhaustion beneath his words. That sounds lonely. Adrian gave a dry smile. According to you, everything about me sounds lonely. Evelyn tilted her head thoughtfully. No, her voice lowered gently. Just the parts built entirely around success. Silence returned between them, while the jazz music slowed into a softer melody near the fireplace. Adrian studied Evelyn carefully beneath the warm restaurant lighting. No expensive jewelry. No polished corporate mask. Just quiet intelligence and tired kindness wrapped inside a woman most people walked past without noticing. What did you want before all this? He asked suddenly. Evelyn blinked once. All what? Double shifts. Hospital bills. Working every holiday while other people celebrate. She looked down into her coffee for several seconds before answering. Law school. Adrian's expression shifted immediately. You studied law? 2 years. What happened? Evelyn smiled faintly, though sadness touched her eyes again. Life happened. Adrian leaned forward slightly. You left because of your brother? She nodded once. Some choices stop feeling like choices when family gets sick. The honesty in her voice landed heavily inside him. Adrian thought about his own life suddenly. Endless meetings. Private jets. Luxury apartments that stayed empty most nights. He had spent years chasing bigger numbers while this woman quietly gave up her future to keep her brother alive. And somehow she still moved through the world with more kindness than anyone he knew. Do you regret it? He asked softly. Evelyn looked toward the snowy city outside the restaurant windows. Sometimes. Then her eyes returned calmly to his. But regret sounds different when the people you love are still breathing. Adrian felt something tighten painfully in his chest at the simplicity of that sentence. Outside, snow continued falling silently across Chicago while inside the warm restaurant glow, Adrian Keller realized the quiet waitress sitting across from him understood more about life than every powerful man he had spent years trying to become. By late January, Thursday evenings at the Langford Hotel had quietly become part of Adrian Keller's routine. His executives noticed small changes in him long before they understood the reason. He stopped scheduling investor dinners every night. He left the office earlier. During meetings, he listened longer before interrupting people. Once, during a tense quarterly review, Adrian calmly defended a junior analyst after another executive publicly criticized her presentation. Fixing mistakes matters more than humiliating people for making them, he had said quietly. The entire conference room had fallen silent afterward. Daniel Reeves noticed the difference more than anyone. One snowy afternoon, he stood inside Adrian's office watching the skyline disappear beneath heavy gray clouds. You are changing, Daniel said carefully. Adrian continued signing paperwork without looking up. That sounds dramatic. No, Daniel crossed his arms lightly. It sounds healthier. Adrian paused briefly before setting the pen down. Beyond the office windows, snow drifted slowly across downtown Chicago, while traffic crawled through frozen streets far below. Do you know the strange thing? Adrian asked quietly. For years I thought becoming successful would make life quieter. Daniel frowned slightly. And Adrian leaned back in his chair. It only made everything louder. That evening, Adrian arrived at the Langford carrying something unusual beneath his arm. A small brown paper bag from a bookstore near Michigan Avenue. Snow melted slowly from his dark coat as he stepped into the warm restaurant lounge filled with soft jazz and golden light. Evelyn Harper stood near the hostess station reviewing table reservations with another waitress. When she noticed Adrian, surprise crossed her face briefly before softening into a faint smile. "You are early," she said as he approached. Adrian glanced toward the nearly empty dining room. "That sounds dangerously close to criticism." Evelyn laughed softly beneath her breath. "I was trying to sound polite." Adrian held up the paper bag awkwardly. "I brought something." Evelyn blinked once. "For me?" Unless the hostess suddenly develops an interest in constitutional law. Her eyebrows lifted slightly as Adrian removed a thick hardcover book from the bag and placed it gently on the table beside her reservation folder. Principles of American Contract Law. Evelyn stared at the title silently for several seconds. "You remembered." Adrian shrugged lightly. "You said you left law school after 2 years." Evelyn carefully touched the edge of the book cover like something fragile. "Most people do not remember details from casual conversations." Adrian looked toward her quietly. "Most people are not paying attention." The words settled gently between them while soft piano music drifted through the restaurant. Evelyn opened the book slowly, running her fingers across highlighted passages already marked with small paper tabs. "You read this?" she asked softly. Adrian nodded once. "At 2 in the morning during a snowstorm." A faint laugh escaped her again. "That sounds unhealthy." "Probably." He smiled slightly. "But now I know why contract law students drink so much coffee." Evelyn looked down at the book once more, and for the first time since Adrian met her, he noticed genuine emotion flicker openly across her face. Not exhaustion, not guarded kindness. Something deeper. Gratitude. "You did not have to do this," she said quietly. Adrian leaned lightly against the table beside her. "I know." Evelyn looked up slowly. "Then why?" Adrian thought about giving a simple answer. Something smooth. Easy. Instead, he told the truth. "Because somewhere along the way, you stopped feeling like someone I happened to meet." Silence followed. Warm and still. Around them, hotel guests moved quietly through the restaurant, while snow continued falling outside the windows beneath the glow of Chicago streetlights. Evelyn closed the book carefully against her chest. "You know this does not fix anything, right?" Adrian frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Her pale blue eyes held his steadily. "People like you and people like me usually exist in completely different worlds." Adrian looked around the restaurant thoughtfully. Expensive wine. Tailored suits. Soft music designed to make wealthy people feel important. Then his eyes returned to Evelyn standing beneath the warm amber light, holding a law book against her chest like something she had almost stopped believing belonged to her anymore. "Maybe the worlds are not as different as everyone thinks," he said quietly. Evelyn smiled sadly. "That sounds nice. But wealthy men usually enjoy the idea of ordinary people more than the reality." The honesty inside her voice stopped him for a second. Adrian lowered his eyes briefly toward the polished wooden floor. "That has happened before." It was not a question. Evelyn looked away toward the snow-covered windows. "Enough times." Adrian suddenly understood something painful. Kindness had taught her caution instead of trust. Somewhere before him, other people with money or influence had treated her temporary attention like charity instead of respect. "Evelyn," he said quietly. She looked back toward him carefully. Adrian's voice lowered. "Honest now. I am not trying to rescue you." Her expression softened slightly at that. "Good. Because honestly," Adrian admitted, "I think you have been rescuing me since the night we met." For a second, neither of them spoke. The restaurant noise faded into soft background sound while snow drifted silently outside the windows. Then a phone buzzed sharply against the hostess counter nearby. Evelyn glanced down immediately. The warmth disappeared from her expression almost instantly. Adrian noticed the change at once. "What happened?" Evelyn looked at the screen, and he saw fear move quietly across her face for the first time. "It is my brother." She answered immediately, turning slightly away. "Ethan." Silence. Adrian watched her grip tighten around the edge of the counter while listening carefully. Her face lost color slowly beneath the restaurant lights. "What do you mean they moved your appointment?" Another silence. Longer this time. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. "Okay. I will come after my shift. She ended the call carefully and stared down at the dark phone screen without speaking. Adrian stepped closer instinctively. Evelyn. She exhaled slowly before looking up again. The hospital delayed his surgery consultation. Her voice remained calm, but Adrian heard exhaustion underneath it now. Familiar exhaustion. The kind carried by people forced to stay strong longer than they should have to. Insurance issues? He asked quietly. Evelyn nodded once. They need another specialist review before approving treatment. Adrian looked at her for several long seconds while snow continued falling silently beyond the windows. Then his eyes drifted toward the law book still resting against her chest. The future she sacrificed. The life she quietly gave away to protect someone else. And in that moment, Adrian Keller realized something terrifyingly simple. The woman who saved his reputation without asking for anything in return had nobody saving her at all. The snow outside the Langford Hotel fell harder by the hour, covering Chicago beneath soft white silence, while headlights blurred through frozen streets below. Inside the restaurant lounge, warm amber light reflected against polished wood and crystal glasses, but the calm atmosphere around Adrian Keller and Evelyn Harper had quietly changed. The phone call from the hospital still lingered heavily between them, like something fragile neither person wanted to touch too quickly. Evelyn stood near the hostess station with her phone still resting loosely in one hand, while the law book Adrian brought her remained pressed gently against her chest. For the first time since he met her, Adrian saw uncertainty in her eyes. Not weakness, just exhaustion finally running out of places to hide. When is the next consultation? He asked softly. Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly toward the floor. 3 weeks. Adrian frowned immediately. That long? She nodded once. Specialists are backed up after the holidays. Adrian understood enough about hospitals to recognize the sentence people used when money complicated urgency. And if they delay longer? Evelyn gave a faint smile that carried no real comfort. Then we wait longer. Adrian stared at her quietly while jazz music drifted softly through the restaurant behind them. Somewhere near the fireplace, guests laughed over wine, completely unaware of the quiet fear standing beneath the warm lights near the hostess counter. That is not acceptable, Adrian said calmly. Evelyn looked back up immediately. Adrian. No, his voice remained gentle but firm. Your brother needs treatment. He needs insurance approval first. Adrian exhaled slowly through his nose, already recognizing the familiar frustration rising inside him. Money solved problems quickly for people like him. For everyone else, suffering usually came attached to paperwork. Let me help, he said quietly. Evelyn's expression changed instantly. Not anger. Worse. Distance. She stepped back slightly from the table beside her. No. Adrian blinked once, surprised by how quickly the answer came. Evelyn. No. Her voice stayed calm, but steadier now. Please do not do that. Adrian looked genuinely confused. Do what? Evelyn tightened her fingers slightly around the edge of the law book. Turn my family into something you can fix. Silence settled heavily between them while snow continued drifting beyond the restaurant windows. Adrian opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. Because beneath her calm voice, he heard fear. Not fear of hospitals. Fear of owing someone powerful. I am not trying to buy gratitude, he said carefully. Evelyn looked toward the snowy street outside. Maybe not intentionally. The sentence landed harder than she probably realized. Adrian leaned lightly against the table near him, suddenly aware of how many times in his life generosity had quietly become control. Expensive gifts, career opportunities, connections. Every favor in his world eventually created invisible expectations. Evelyn had probably seen enough of that already. You really think I would hold help against you? He asked quietly. Evelyn remained silent for several seconds before answering honestly. I think people with power usually do not realize when they are making others feel small. The restaurant noise around them faded into soft background sound. Adrian looked down briefly at his watch, then slowly removed it from his wrist and placed it on the table beside him. The expensive silver timepiece reflected warm amber light from above. Evelyn frowned slightly. What are you doing? Adrian met her eyes evenly. Trying to speak to you without looking like a billionaire for 5 minutes. Against her will, Evelyn laughed softly beneath her breath. Tired. Genuine. The sound relieved something inside him immediately. That is not how wealth works, she said quietly. Probably not. Adrian folded his hands calmly. But I am trying to understand your side of this. Evelyn stared down at the law book again. People help when they think they can rescue someone. Her voice softened. Then eventually they realize healing another person's life is slower and messier than they expected. Adrian listened carefully without interrupting. And when that happens? He asked. Evelyn's eyes drifted toward the falling snow beyond the windows. They leave. The simplicity of the answer carried years inside it. Adrian suddenly understood this conversation had very little to do with money. She was protecting dignity. Her own. Her brother's. Maybe even his. Evelyn. She looked back toward him quietly. Adrian spoke slowly now, carefully. The night we met, you protected my reputation without asking for anything in return. He paused briefly. You did not know me. You did not owe me kindness. But you still chose it. Evelyn lowered her eyes again. That was different. No, Adrian's voice softened further. I think this is exactly the same. Silence followed. Warm, and still beneath the restaurant lights. Adrian could almost see her trying to decide whether trusting him would become another mistake later. Finally, Evelyn exhaled quietly and sat down across from him near the window. Snow drifted heavily outside while the city lights blurred silver through the storm. His name is Ethan, she said softly. Adrian sat beside her slowly. Tell me about him. A faint smile appeared immediately, different from the guarded expressions she usually carried. This one belonged to memory. Family. Love. He is 21, Evelyn said quietly. Terrible at folding laundry. Brilliant at drawing buildings. Adrian listened carefully while she continued speaking about her brother. About sketchbooks covering their apartment. About hospital waiting rooms filled with architecture magazines. About the way Ethan still apologized every time medical bills arrived, even though none of it was his fault. The more she spoke, the more Adrian understood something painful. Evelyn had spent years holding everyone else together emotionally while quietly disappearing herself. And you? Adrian asked softly after a while. What about me? What do you want now? Evelyn looked genuinely surprised by the question, like nobody had asked her in a very long time. She stared out toward the snow-covered city while thinking carefully. Honestly, Adrian nodded once. Honestly, her fingers rested lightly against the law book cover. I want 1 year where nobody in my family is afraid. The sentence settled softly between them while jazz music drifted through the restaurant, and snow continued falling endlessly beyond the glass. Adrian looked at her quietly for several long seconds. Then, without performance or polished charm, he answered with complete honesty. I think I would like to help make that happen. Evelyn looked toward him immediately. This time she did not step away. She did not refuse. She simply studied his face carefully beneath the warm amber light, searching for something. Control maybe. Ego. Obligation. But whatever she expected to find there slowly disappeared from her expression. You really mean that? She whispered. Adrian nodded once. Yes. And for the first time since they met, Evelyn Harper looked at Adrian Keller not like a powerful man standing above her world, but like someone quietly standing beside it instead. Spring arrived quietly in Chicago that year. Snow melted from sidewalks beside the river, while sunlight returned slowly to the city after months of gray winter skies. Trees near Michigan Avenue carried the first signs of green again, and for the first time in a long while, Adrian Keller noticed small things he used to ignore. Morning light across office windows. The sound of street musicians near coffee shops. The way exhausted people smiled when someone held a door open for them. Success had once made him feel powerful. Now peace felt more valuable. Inside St. Gabriel Medical Center on a mild April afternoon, sunlight spilled softly across pale hospital walls while nurses moved quietly through the cardiac wing. Adrian stood near the waiting room windows holding 2 paper coffee cups in one hand. He wore a dark navy coat without a tie for once. No investors. No cameras. No polished speeches. Just a man waiting beside someone who mattered. Across the room, Evelyn Harper sat quietly flipping through one of Ethan's sketchbooks while her younger brother spoke with a doctor nearby. Her blonde hair rested loosely against her shoulders, and for the first time since Adrian met her, the exhaustion inside her expression looked lighter somehow. Not gone, just shared now instead of carried alone. Adrian walked toward her slowly and handed her the coffee. Still black? He asked softly. Evelyn accepted the cup with a faint smile. You remembered. Adrian sat beside her near the window while warm afternoon sunlight reflected across the polished hospital floor. "How is he?" Evelyn glanced toward Ethan through the glass consultation room doors. "The specialist approved the surgery plan this morning." Adrian nodded quietly. Relief settled gently between them. Months earlier, the consultation delays would have stretched endlessly through insurance reviews and waiting lists. Adrian never told Evelyn exactly how many private calls he made after that night in the restaurant. He only made certain the right doctors finally saw Ethan's case without delay. No publicity, no announcements, no grand gestures, just quiet help, the way she once helped him. "He likes you," Evelyn said softly after a while. Adrian looked toward Ethan laughing with the doctor inside the consultation room. "I think he mostly likes making fun of my expensive shoes." Evelyn laughed quietly beneath her breath. "That too." Silence followed gently. "Comfortable now. Familiar." Adrian watched sunlight dance softly across the hospital windows while people moved quietly through the hallway carrying flowers, balloons, and tired hope. Strange how different hospitals felt when someone you cared about was inside them. "Daniel told me you turned down another merger last week," Evelyn said carefully. Adrian leaned back in his chair. "News travels fast." "You avoided the question." Adrian smiled faintly. "It would have doubled company revenue." And his eyes drifted toward the waiting room, sealing briefly before answering. "It also would have destroyed 600 jobs in Milwaukee." Evelyn looked at him quietly. The old Adrian would have signed immediately. Adrian nodded once. "Probably." "What changed?" Adrian turned toward her slowly. Sunlight softened the edges of her face while the sketchbook rested quietly across her lap. "You did." Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly with a tired smile. "That still sounds dramatic." "No," Adrian's voice stayed calm. "Honest. It sounds accurate." Ethan finally emerged from the consultation room moments later, carrying several paperwork folders beneath one arm. Tall, thin, nervous energy hidden beneath obvious intelligence. "Good news," he said immediately toward Evelyn before noticing Adrian beside her. "Oh, sorry. Am I interrupting billionaire self-reflection again?" Adrian laughed softly beneath his breath. "Your sister has made sarcasm genetically contagious." Ethan grinned slightly before dropping into the chair across from them. "Doctor says surgery scheduling should move quickly now." Evelyn reached for his hand immediately. Relief filled her eyes so quickly Adrian had to look away for a second. Some emotions deserved privacy. "That is good," Adrian said quietly. Ethan nodded. "Yeah." Then after a pause he added carefully, "Thanks for helping." Adrian looked toward him evenly. "Your sister already thanked me enough." Ethan glanced toward Evelyn with faint amusement. "She does not usually trust rich people." Evelyn sighed softly. "Ethan, I am serious." He smiled toward Adrian. "You are doing surprisingly well." Adrian leaned back with mock seriousness. "That might be the nicest insult anyone has ever given me." The three of them laughed quietly together beneath the warm hospital light. Simple moment. Ordinary moment. Yet Adrian realized he felt happier sitting in this waiting room than he ever had standing inside million-dollar celebrations. Several weeks later, on a calm evening in early May, Adrian stood alone inside his office overlooking the Chicago skyline at sunset. The city glowed gold beneath fading spring light, while reflections shimmered across the river below. On his desk rested a framed photograph from the hospital cafe taken accidentally by Ethan. Evelyn laughing beside the window while holding coffee in both hands. Natural. Unposed. Real. Daniel Reeves entered carrying financial reports before noticing the photograph. "You finally stopped pretending work was your entire personality." Adrian smiled faintly without looking away from the skyline. "Turns out there are more important things than reputation." Daniel folded his arms lightly. "Such as?" Adrian thought quietly for a moment. Then his eyes drifted toward the framed photograph again. "People who protect your dignity when they gain nothing from it." Outside the office windows, Chicago moved endlessly beneath the evening sky, while somewhere far below, ordinary people hurried home after long days carrying invisible struggles nobody else noticed. Adrian Keller understood them differently now. Because the woman who once quietly saved his reputation had ultimately rescued something far more valuable than his public image. She reminded him that kindness without conditions was the rarest form of power in the world. And sometimes the people who change your life the most arrive so quietly, you almost fail to see them at all.